Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, welcome to today's Ethex Cuppa Club. We've got people coming in at the moment, so I think we'll probably just give people a couple of minutes to all log in. Yeah, I'm grateful for everyone coming and join us on such a glorious hot sunny day. It certainly is here in Oxford. I hope it is where you are too. Yeah, so I'm joined by Emily Richmond and Vince O'Farrell, directors at Bridport Cohousing. I guess this is a bit of an informal chat to learn more about the organisation and pioneering co-housing as a means of enabling sort of affordable and sustainable community living for local people in Bridport. But I think it's a fantastic model and something possibly that's replicable more widely as well. So Bridport is currently listing on Ethex platform. We're going to hear a bit more about their positive social impact of co-housing, how it encourages sort of the sense of community, sharing, helps people develop new skills and interests, as well as also having a commitment to helping people live more sustainably, I suppose, particularly in terms of their environment. I think one of the key things that Bridport Cohousing is looking to tackle is the question of affordable housing, particularly in a location like Bridport, where there's a kind of a disconnect maybe between what's happening in the housing market and what's happening, the situation of local people. And we'll also have a look at the sort of vision behind co-housing communities, how it works, how you're looking to, significantly reduce carbon footprint within 5 years. I think it's important at this point to state that this isn't a financial promotion. We're not giving financial advice here. It's more an opportunity to learn about what Bridport are doing and the impact that they're delivering. So in terms of how we're running the webinar, we'll have a bit of an introductory talk from Vince and Emily in a minute, but there's a chat function here. If anybody wants to post questions into that chat function at any time, I'll then try and work those questions into the webinar. So the webinar is being recorded. We'll upload a recording of the webinar to our YouTube channel and website, so you can watch it again. And we'll last about 45 minutes today. But at that point, I'm going to pass across to Emily and Vince. And then Bridport is not actually a young organisation. I think you've been going 12 years. Is that right, Emily?
Yeah, that's right. About 12 years ago, a group of people got together just in their lounge and started to discuss how we could look at different ways of living that would meet some of our needs, both as individuals, but as a community where people were increasingly feeling dispersed amongst the town without actually making those connections, and that Bridport is an extremely expensive place to live. So people who have grown up in the area really can't afford to stay here. There's a high number of second homes for holidaymakers, and so they began to look at what they could do, and they looked at some of the models that exist around the world. Housing is different to living in a street. It's intentional, but it's intentional in the same way that you would live in your house. You live in your house with your own house, your own front door, and your own garden, but you come out of your front door and there's an intention to be kind, to be friendly, to say hello, to help your neighbours. If you fall out with them, to maybe find a way to come back to a place where you can at least be kind to each other. And this is largely to address some of the mental health issues that people are suffering from, the isolation that people experience, and also the high dependency that we have on external sources for social care. So we wouldn't replace social care in any way, but certainly if you're an older person, you might expect to be able to live in your home for longer because someone will help you when you get a bit ill to go and get some food or go and get your medication. And that's something that we've really experienced already in COVID. During these periods of lockdown, we have already helped each other without living there. So we've been coming together now, well, during COVID over Zoom like this, but trying to look at how we can live there. And one of the really central tenets to living in co-housing is that there is a common house. So the common house is a place to meet, it's a place to eat, it's a place to run the meetings that are involved with, you know, running an intentional neighbourhood. You know, we have gardening meetings, we have meetings about permaculture, we have socio-democratic development meetings. They're things that people are interested in, but they also help support the neighbourhood to keep it going in the direction that it was intended for. People will be able to use the common house for doing yoga lessons. We'll be able to let it out to people. BCHA, who are a housing association partnership, they run various support groups for getting people back into work. And the common house could be a place where we would use all of those different aspects that gives co-housing its qualitative difference between living in a street and living in co-housing. I think for myself, I joined about 6 years ago. I'm a parent carer with an older disabled child. And my direct experience was, how am I going to provide for myself and my son in a world where I have to basically pay for everyone to be involved with him? Because that is the world that we currently live in. And I wanted people to know him. I wanted people to be his friend. And that is exactly what co-housing has given me. Every single person who joins co-housing knows Herbie's name. That is absolutely amazing for the mother of a you know, disabled adult who are often very isolated. He has friends who are 4 and he has friends who are 67, and they genuinely are his friends. So the common house is the place where all of that relationship grows and develops and is maintained. So that's why we are really keen to get our common house. And the project has been really difficult to get off the ground because we're looking at doing so many things that normally you would only do one of. So we are affordable housing, we are mixed tenancy of social rent, shared ownership, and grant funded share ownership. We're affordable. We are looking at sustainability. So our houses are all built to a really high AECB silver standard. And each one of those things is quite expensive to build. And trying to do it all at once from a bunch of people who just started in their lounge and had to go out and persuade people to give them the money to do this is why we have ultimately ended up with needing to raise money to build the common house that will be the heart of our neighbourhood. And personally, I can't wait to see it built.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it's worthwhile because it is a big, complex project. You know, the broader Bridport Cohousing project itself would be worth just talking a little bit about, you know, the numbers of houses that are being built, the kind of split between affordable sales and affordable rents, and also maybe the partnership with the housing association as well.
With BCHA, so there's 53 houses, so it will be the largest co-housing group so far in the UK. There are larger ones in America and I think in Scandinavia, and that is it's split half for sale and half for rent, social rent through BCHA. And the for sale houses, there are, I think, 14 houses available for sale through Bridport Cohousing at 80%. And then the rest are for grant funded shared ownership. So they will be sold between 30% and 75%. So it's really, really ambitious to then also build high spec quality housing, and it's been incredibly difficult to get people on board because of that really tiny margin when you're trying to build something that's really good quality. And we've been very lucky with the people that we've, you know, got on board now and we have good working relationships with. So BCHA went forward into initially just doing ordinary rent. They're now looking at social rent, and putting in some of the houses up for grant funded shared ownership meant that we had another aspect where people in this area could afford to buy a house, a good quality house. And so, yeah, that's where we are so far.
In terms of the development of the project, where is it in terms of the kind of the build side, I suppose?
Well, my house has got a roof and it's got windows and it's got walls and it's got a floor and it just got its Velux window that's in the roof. So that means it's now watertight, which means they'll start doing the second fix quite soon. Obviously, this is an incredibly difficult time to be building a house with Brexit and with the pandemic. It's talk to any builder about getting materials and they'll roll their eyes and tell you how hard it is. So we're having to work, you know, under difficult circumstances, but they are getting it out of the ground. Fry's is our builder, and they are persevering relentlessly to get them built. We've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 of the terraces are up. A lot of most of the groundworks are done apart from the finishing, and we're looking at getting the electricity on as soon as possible through our own electricity company, which will eventually be set up.
That's great. And in terms of so this raise here, as we mentioned, is for raising money for the common house. It's also, I think, to potentially build a couple of guest bedrooms as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's for 3 things actually. We borrowed money. We raised money before in order to buy the land. Sorry, I also have a copy. So we raised money initially to buy the land, and some of that money will need paying back. So we need to raise a small amount of money to pay back what's left there. The 2 guest rooms are what allow people to have smaller housing. So that's another way that you can make your housing affordable, because there are places to work and there's places for people to stay. So you don't need a 4-bedroom house if your mother comes to visit you, every other weekend. Potentially she can go and stay into the guest rooms. So yes, we'll be paying those back, and they are set to be built within the BCHA's building, but the whole site will be able to have access to them in the south west apartment block. So there is that.
So I've got a couple of questions coming in. Was there anything that you wanted to cover just ahead of, or shall I go into sort of giving some of those questions across?
I could add a little bit of context. So yes, the reason we need to raise funds now is that we originally imagined that everything would be built in one phase, including the common house. But negotiations with a bank, because we were dependent on a bank loan, negotiations with a bank were a bit prolonged. I wasn't involved, it was before my time, but I think it was to do with the security that we could offer them. And in the end, because of COVID, last year to essentially to compromise, and we agreed a contract with the builder. We agreed a loan with the bank, which enabled us to actually build the dwellings. Okay, so we refer to it as 53 houses. In fact, it's a mix of houses, and I think it's about 14 or 16 apartments. Perhaps I've got too many there. Emily will correct me if I'm wrong. So left out of that build contract was the common house, and we always knew we were going to need to raise funds to build that. We've realized we needed a bit more because we need to pay off some of the loans from our friends and family and supporters, which we raised nearly 3 years ago now, 3 years ago or more, to buy the land. Plus, as Emily's just said, there's 2 guest rooms which are within one of the apartment blocks that BCHA is funding the construction of. So we need to pay BCHA for those rooms. So there's three components of the money we're looking to raise. And if we manage to raise the maximum amount, which is 732,000, all three components will, the funding for which will be covered. If we don't manage to raise 732,000, then there's two other scenarios where we don't do everything. We only do some of it.
There was a reason why we had to go ahead as well, because I'm reading some of the questions about where the funding was. Some of the upfront costs for the build came through a really large grant from Homes England, and they have a time frame on when you get agreement for the money and when that money goes back into the pot or just goes back to the Treasury. So we didn't have time to continue to try and raise money for the Common House without losing that grant, and we needed that grant given the expense of the build in order to go ahead with the build. So that was partly where we had to make that decision quite quickly. In terms of the money for the land, we raised that money literally by sending emails to people that we knew and asking them to ask people that they knew, and did it through that method. We haven't done a community share issue before.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions I'll attempt to answer, Josh, if you like, in the chat. Shall I do that?
Well, I mean, I think we can just go through and, you know, in terms of just the conversation here. But I just think about in terms of that capital stack, I suppose, for the original development, you have the grants from Homes England, you have bank loan from Triodos, I think it is, and then you also have some kind of friends and family loans as well. And is that the full kind of set of it? And now there's this other layer of community shares of equity being sought as well to enable the build of the communal buildings.
Yes. We did all of quite a significant number of us have also put in our own money. So, you know, the initial sort of 12 years was always bankrolled either by the immense generosity of, you know, for example, our architect, our project manager. People put in hours and hours and hours of volunteer time, and other people who could afford it put in money in order to pay the costs that were needed. There were often legal costs that we had to meet, and we would basically almost pass around a tin and say who can put money in, and that was the initial way that we kept going, was literally on our own decision that we really wanted to do this. We're a very tenacious group.
Yeah, and you've also, I mean, you've got a very, you know, you've got a highly skilled and quite varied kind of director and trustee group on the organisation as well. And one of the questions that's come in is actually around how did you find that mix of skills for the board, and did that sort of naturally come in, or did you have to approach particular people to bring in those skills?
Well, within the membership, we have a varied range of people, especially as the membership's grown. We're now up to about 56 members. So we look first of all to elect members through the membership into the board, but we also are really keen to get outside advice. So we do look to the board of directors at BCHA, and we work closely with the people within BCHA on all different levels, you know, whether we're looking at housing and allowing people to move into the build, or whether we're looking at, you know, going forward with the build, or more sort of surreal ideas about, you know, what do we want it to look like when we live there and how we're going to have a partnership. But where we want more information, we go and look for directors and we ask them. So we've got an outside director, Phillida, who is, you know, works an awful lot on housing associations. She's got 25 years of experience in this kind of field. And, you know, it's really useful to have those people from the outside looking in, because obviously any organisation can get very entrenched in what they think and where they're going. And it's so useful for that not to happen to you.
Yes, it is a mix. It is a mix. So, I mean, I'm an interesting example in that I became a member because my partner was a member, and I have some background in affordable housing in Bridport. In fact, I am the treasurer of another community land trust, and so I was grabbed basically by the previous treasurer, who took about 6 months to persuade me to agree to take over from him. So that was an example of where an opportunity presented itself, and BC, as we call it, Bridport Cohousing, sort of grabbed me. But in other ways, for instance, for our professional advisors, we've actually gone out and sought out individuals who we knew had experience either of co-housing or a community-led housing, and we've used them, and one of them is still on board as our professional advisor.
We've had some, I think we've got quite a few people here probably from the sort of community land trust background or working on similar projects. And so there's a couple of related questions, I think, is one, have you got any advice for ensuring that a neighbourhood or the local plan is co-housing friendly? You know, how do you get that concept into that plan and into that discussion? And then maybe could you talk a little bit about your experience around planning permission as well?
I can speak to how we get the co-housing into the build, is because the whole site is literally designed around the idea of co-housing. So the common house is in the centre, and there are no cars. So all the parking is around the outside. So people have to get out of their cars, and then you've got these wide streets, you've got communal growing areas, and you've got the common house, you've got your post box in the common house, so you go there to collect your post, you go there to have shared meals, you go there to, you know, have a meeting. And by having the cars on the outside, you have time to stop and you have time to talk. And in fact, one of the things that people are often concerned about is like, how long will it take me to get to my car when I'm in a hurry? You know, how will, you know, what sign can I make that says I'm on my way? Because the site itself lends itself to creating a neighbourhood, to making co-housing rather than just a street.
Yeah. And then also, so I guess I think one of the things that the person was driving at is how do you get that into the neighbourhood local plan? You know, you've got this co-housing concept. So how can you get, you know, the local council, the local decision makers around how housing is going to develop in the area? Can you get them to be thinking about this model and embracing this model?
Oh, I see. Well, I think that we've worked really closely with Dorset Council right from the beginning, and they've been very supportive. They put in, you know, quite a few grants themselves. So one of the things that we would hope to do is to continue that conversation with them, and also by being up and running ourselves, we can model it in reality. We know the work that's gone into getting to where we are now. So we would be really looking to help other people avoid some of the pitfalls that we've been through. Especially in the area that we've managed to get it was by persuading Dorset Council that this was a brilliant way forward, you know, that we ought to be looking at building better housing for people and better communities that support the people that live in them, but also the environment around them, both, you know, in terms of nature and also in terms of impact on your neighbours, you know, parking, noise, all of those sorts of things. Yeah.
And you evidently found them receptive to that message. And I'm wondering, yeah, were there particular things that really tick boxes for the council that got them on board, that then, you know, helped with the whole planning process and that?
Well, I wasn't party to that exactly, but I imagine that they definitely were, because we're here. You know, they've worked with us. They have never really been against us, and they've given us lots of advice as we've gone along. They've wanted this project to work. I think that's as much as I can say about it. There will be someone else in the membership who could tell you a lot more about it, because that was obviously quite a long time ago now, and I've been here for 6 years, so it was previous to that.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. And then, so I'm just running through a few questions, and this one is this is from Sean Garrity and relates to the, I guess, the common house itself. Did you consider a temporary structure at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, we would have a temporary structure if that's what, you know, it comes down to. But the thing about a common house is that it really is, it's really what makes co-housing. Without co-housing, without a common house, you have a street of friendly people, hopefully, or people who are prepared to at least try and, you know, not be too awful to each other. So whilst we could have a temporary structure for a short while, we really need something where people can meet of all ages. So one of the things about a temporary structure is the toilets would also be temporary, and that wouldn't work, for example, for my son who has disabilities. It wouldn't work for some of the older members of our community who suffer from the cold, who, you know, need to feel secure. But we have always been pretty creative. So if we needed to have a temporary structure, we would, but it would be temporary. We would be really looking to get to the point where we could build our common house.
And we've had a question coming in about your affordable model. So I guess maybe just understanding about, you know, how do you define affordability? How do you ensure affordability? And maybe compare that to mutual home ownership models.
Do you want to do that one, Vince?
Yes, I'll try.
We did look at mutual home ownership a while back, but it didn't particularly work for us.
I'm going to admit that I don't know a lot about mutual home ownership, so I'm not sure I can do a fair comparison between them.
I think maybe if you just then outline, you know, how is affordability then built into the project, and then just give that.
Okay, so affordability is built into the project through at least two ways. One is that certainly if you're buying a house, you won't be able to own more than 75 or 80% of the equity in it. The actual and therefore when you come to sell, you're not going to be able to sell it all, and the amount you get when you sell is geared to that original price. Secondly, affordability comes also in terms of running costs. So the actual fabric, if you like, of the dwellings, of the houses, is very energy efficient. The houses themselves are probably slightly smaller than average, on the basis that there is no provision for lots and lots of extra bedrooms for visitors. So there's an assumption that visitors are going to stay in the guest rooms. There's an assumption that, for instance, you don't absolutely have to have space for a washing machine and a tumble dryer, although we believe tumble dryers are a bit of a no-no. So there will be a laundry in the common house. You'll be able to do your washing using shared facilities. There will be some savings in terms of food through the shared meals that we will all have, possibly once a week, once we're all in there. So there's in terms of the actual cost of the house, there's some savings, and in terms of the living costs of living in the house at Hazelmead, as we call it, there'll be some savings too. There's savings from, we hope, from transport, and also from energy, which would be provided via our own energy grid. So there's not one big hit, probably. There's a number of smaller hits which together should make it a much more affordable environment to live in. But the other aspect as well is renting. It's very, very expensive to rent in Bridport. I mean, I was looking for somewhere the other day, and a 2-bedroom house on South Street was over £1,000 a month for a very small place. So the rentals will be at social rent, and that is there's hardly any houses that are available for that kind of rent in Bridport. There's certainly not enough.
people who have lived here for years, if they're being moved on by their landlords, they're having to move out of the area. There is very, very little. And so that will be one of, that will be 24 houses, I think it is, that will come onto the market for people to have.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that. And then, so we've had a question come in then in terms of the investment itself. So what are the income streams or revenue streams that are going to come in order for the percentage, the target interest rate to be paid, and ultimately for shares to be able to be withdrawn from the investment?
So the main income stream will be service charges, which BC, Bridport Cohousing, will receive from all 53 houses and apartments on the development. They're fairly secure in that the residents who live in the Bournemouth Churches Housing Association houses and flats at BCHA, as part of the agreement, they need to pay that service charge. So that's the majority of the income stream. Very, very predictable. Other elements are the common house will have, well, we plan it to have, some rooms, as well as one large room which would be used as a dining room, which can be hired. So we'll have a hire stream from some of the facilities in the common house. And thirdly, the 2 guest rooms will be available if they're not actually hired out to members or their families. They will be available for hire to the general Bridport population. And basically the rates we're proposing will be, it's a 50% discount for members, essentially. So members get them at half the price that the general public could hire them for. So it's a fairly convenient location. It's not immediately in the town centre, but it's probably a 10-minute walk from the town centre. So it's quite convenient if you want to visit Bridport and West Bay.
That's good. So she's got those revenue streams there, sort of built into the project. And I think that's a really good point about that. This dependable long-term revenue stream that's coming in to finance the interest payments and the withdrawals.
In terms of repayment, there are formally you have to give 180 days notice if you wish to withdraw your share capital, and it does depend on, and of course it's very difficult because we haven't got any direct experience of it yet, very difficult to know to what extent we will be able to service those withdrawals effectively immediately. But the directors, as one of the conditions of the offer, is that at the end of each financial year, how much share capital can be withdrawn.
Thank you. We've got a question here. Would you be receptive to a visit and or sharing your master plan?
Emily's probably better to answer this. I mean, I think a visit at the moment is not appropriate, not actually onto the site, although you can, there are public roads and paths on 3 of the edges of the site, so you can get a glimpse of what's going on if you come to Bridport and have a look. But because it is a building site, the builders are fairly sensitive about visits on the site. So I, for instance, haven't been on site since, well, it's for 12 months since it started. Emily, you're muted.
I know. We are keen to share what we've learned, though. So, we have already had people who have been setting up other co-housing groups come and meet us and hear, how we've got as far as we have. And you know, we really believe in co-housing as a model for the world that we're living in. So we obviously, there is always a group of us that are really keen to share that, to help other people get it up and running, and avoid some of the pitfalls that we've come across. It is getting quicker to set up a co-housing group and get something built, but you know, the initial ones took about 20 years, so we think we've kind of done quite well at 12, but some of them have started before us and finished before us. So but that's often to do with finances again. We had people who were all putting their money in a pot together, which is more of the model that we were talking about earlier. So yeah,
there's some architect's drawings in the share offer document, which will give you, I'm not sure what's meant by master plan, which will give you an idea of what the development constitutes. But if you mean how exactly in detail did we go about it, then I'm sure Emily and I would respond to emails with more specific questions.
Fantastic. And then so the question has come in: how do you ensure that there isn't second home ownership for units that then subsequently come on for sale?
Because everybody has to go through nominations and allocations. So nomination is a board that is set up between Bridport Cohousing, Bournemouth Churches Housing Association and Dorset Council. So two members from each of those organisations sits on the board, and you would never pass nominations if you were not going to live in the site. So you wouldn't even get through the first hurdle. And actually, before you become a member, you have to become a member before you can go to nominations. If you became a member and you weren't available to come and meet regularly, you didn't live around here, it would become apparent really quickly. And, you know, we have had people who have worked really hard on the project for years and then have lived out of town, and then have gradually realised that they can't move their lives quickly enough, and they've had to leave. And even though they've been very instrumental, the board has always been for local people, you know, as much as we possibly can. And definition of local depends on some people. I mean, I've lived here 10 years, some people have lived here 25 years, some people have been born here, and, you know, those people all might have a different idea about what local is. But basically, membership nominations would be the absolute stop. That's
what you're in. That's the prevention, basically, of that second home ownership.
And
Great.
that's not just us. That's the Housing Association and Dorset Council. So it's you know, policed.
Right. Someone's raised a point there that maybe there have been other co-housing developments where the common areas have been developed after the private dwellings, and that in some ways those people have got used to living more privately rather than the co-living aspect. Do you have any concerns about that at all in terms of this project, as you are now, you know, you're through a lot of the build phase on the apartments, and the common areas are still to be built?
I think that's a really interesting question. I was really interested to read that. I think that we already have quite a strong community in our membership, despite the fact that we don't live there yet. So there is a degree of neighbourliness that exists beyond the streets that we live in. It is about people. I mean, co-housing at the end of the day is about people. But I think as well, one of the major things that we'll be doing in order to address some of our sustainability and environmental ideologies is growing food. So we'll be working as a group to grow food. And at the end of each garden, there is a growing space that belongs to the whole community, where we will all be contributing to growing that food. And obviously some people are brilliant gardeners, and some people are like me, and I'll just, you know, pull up a few potatoes, but we'll be meeting. And I think also just the fact that there's shared outdoor spaces that haven't got cars in. I think until you live in a place where there are no cars, it's really easy to underestimate what a difference it makes to be able to stop on your street and have a chat and not worry about where the kids are or whether the dog's gone off, or because so those connections will still be being formed. But and I imagine we'll eat outdoors, because that's basically what we've been doing, you know, when we can during the last 18 months, and we haven't been living in co-housing, we haven't had a common house. But the common house will mean that we can do it really regularly and all the way through the year.
I can just add something to what Emily said. So we had a full members meeting, at least 2 full members meetings, when we were discussing this share offer and how the membership felt about it. And one of the options was to actually not go ahead with the share offer immediately, and take it in a more relaxed way, such that we would be resident in the houses before the common house was ready. And perhaps this ties in with another question, and perhaps have some temporary structure like a yurt or something to see us through. There's practical problems with that, because you couldn't then put the yurt on the site where the common house is going to be, so you would need space for the yurt. And there was a general widespread agreement, I think, that actually starting the residential aspect of the community without the common house was not a good thing. Possibly because most people sensed that the kind of situation that Sian had mentioned in her question could happen. You know, there would be that one less factor gluing the community together, and there'd be greater risk that individuals would fly off and just live individually again. So I think we were aware of that, and we've consciously decided that it is important. The common house is so important that it does need to be built pretty much at this time, in time pretty much for our getting into living in the houses next year.
And so I'm conscious of time, but we've got a couple more questions that have come through. There's a couple of questions around your definition of affordable rent. So the question is that 50% of market rent, or how's that affordable rent? You mentioned social rent, and so how's that arrived at?
That will be set by Bridport, by Bournemouth Churches Housing Association, but I believe it's 60%. It's, you know, 60% of the open market value is where social housing rent sits. Yeah.
And the question, does BCHA fund the social rent houses? I'm assuming, does that mean, do they provide tenants? But yeah.
Well, they work with us. So everyone who lives there, first of all, has to be a member of whatever tenancy you have, whether you're a shared ownership or a renter. So we would work with them to meet people and encourage people to, you know, understand what co-housing is before they moved in. And BCHA are very happy to do that. They're on board with what co-housing is. I
thought Caroline was asking where BCHA got the money from to build the houses, and that's, I mean, I don't understand the detail, but clearly they have a capital development fund, and they've got various projects. I think, from what I understand, much of their previous or existing stock is old housing that they've taken over and possibly refurbished. So I'm not sure to what extent they have done much new build at all in the past, but that will be a question for their finance people.
And they did take over the Homes England grant. So the Homes England grant that we got went to them, and the Bridport co-housing houses was raised through a Triodos loan.
Yeah.
And someone has just asked if you could just mention how the eligibility process works to become a resident. If we could just run through that again, in terms of, I suppose, becoming a member, and then how that you then move into becoming potentially a resident. So in terms of eligibility, in the first instance, you would look at being a local member, and the further you live away, the less likely you are to get a house. You can still be a member. I mean, we have members who
live in the area, but they just want to support the project. So that's the first. Then after that, it's things like how much you're contributing to being, to getting the project on the ground. That would come into your eligibility for getting a house. So those are the kinds of things. And we look at we do look at diversity and making sure that we've got an intergenerational community. So at one point, for example, we were we had a lot of people who were over 60. So at that point in time, because we very much wanted to have families on board, we kind of put a hiatus on, or people could still join, but they were alerted to the fact that at this point in time, they might be quite unlikely to get a house. But the local lettings policy is on the website, so you can have a look at that and it will tell you in detail what you have to do. But number one is local, and you can't earn over £40,000 a year.
Thank you. And so, like I say, I'm conscious of time, but there are a couple more questions come on. So if you, Vince and Emily, you're okay to just answer those couple of questions, I'll just run through those and then we'll wrap it up, I think. So it says here, so one of the questions is around how the service, so how the revenue stream is working in order to pay back investors. So I think maybe if you have answered that question.
I'll quickly run through that again. Yes, so we're talking about Susan Johnson's question, I think.
Yes, that's right.
So the interest on the shares, the interest on the shares is generated essentially from service charges, which and by that I don't mean rents and I don't mean mortgage repayments. So service charges are charges for the services on the site. So you say, does that mean people are repaying the debts of the scheme as rent? No, the rent goes to for social renters, for the rental properties, the rent goes to BCHA. For shared ownership houses, there is a rental component for the equity that you don't own. And for the BCHA grant funded houses, that would go to BCHA. And for the Bridport Cohousing funded houses, that will go to Bridport Cohousing. Any mortgages that the shared ownership people have, is that money goes direct to their mortgagor, if I got that right. And that that's no part of the financial arrangements between them and Bridport Cohousing and Bournemouth Churches Housing Association.
So fundamentally, it's that service charge, basically.
It is fundamentally the service charge, which is for the roads and the lighting, yeah.
Finance, basically. Okay. Great. Thank you so much for that, Emily and Vince. That's brilliant. I mean, I think we've been really excited to have Bridport on the platform because I think it is it is an early mover. It is, and it's such a kind of ambitious scale that it's got that real possibility to be a kind of demonstrator project for what can be done in the co-housing space. So we're really pleased to have you on the platform. So we're just going to finish up there, I think. Just thanks for everyone. We've got more events coming up. We've got another Cuppa Club coming up this Thursday for Co-Charger. We'll send out a follow-up email with links to the information that's been discussed today. But I'd just like to finish up, say thank you, Vince and Emily, for your time. And thank you for everyone for attending and on this really hot and sweltering day. And thank you very much. And hopefully see you at the next Cuppa Club.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.